Hello, and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we'll travel back in time to the 57th Academy Awards, which awarded the films of 1984. Legendary director David Lean returned with what would be the final film of his career, A Passage to India. The sweeping epic tied with Amadeus on nomination morning with 11, positioning both as frontrunners. But when it came time for the Oscar ceremony itself, Amadeus walked away with 8 wins, including Best Picture, while A Passage to India had to settle for just 2. So why did Academy voters pass over such a traditional-feeling film in favor of an artistically daring film like Amadeus? We'll explore all this and more as we discuss how the Oscar almost went to A Passage to India. And welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I am your host, Kevin Jacobson, and today I have another fabulous returning guest with me. You last heard him from 2003, Mystic River, and this person is a Gold Derby colleague of mine. He's one of the best writers at Gold Derby and a real expert, and that is Mr. Tony Ruiz.
Oh, you're too kind. You're too kind.
Yes, I am too kind. Correct. But welcome back.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah, so this is about 19 years in the past at this point since we last talked. So a lot has changed at the Oscars. So let us get into
particularly the hairstyles and among other things.
It's truly tragic. But so we are going to be talking about the year 1984, which is not exactly the most remembered or cherished Oscar year. There are a lot of movies from 1984 that people do know and love, but not a lot, particularly in the Oscar race so much. But we will certainly get to that. But what we will be covering today for our runner-up is A Passage to India. And that is what I and many others believe is the runner-up to Amadeus. So let's just get into a quick summary of A Passage to India. It is based on the 1924 novel of the same name by E.M. Forster, as well as a play that was adapted from the book by Santha Rama Rao. It's about a young British woman named Adela Custard, who travels with her elderly friend, Mrs. Moore, to India to see about marrying Mrs. Moore's son, Rani, the city magistrate in Chandrapur. And while there, Mrs. Moore strikes up a friendship, first of all, with a local Indian physician, Dr. Aziz, who eventually takes Mrs. Moore and Adela on the trip to the local Marabar caves. And while exploring the caves, Mrs. Moore departs out of fear, and that leaves Adela and Dr. Aziz to themselves, at which point Adela wanders off and comes back kind of in shambles, leading many to believe that Dr. Aziz had actually raped her, and this leads to further tension between the British and Indian communities as Dr. Aziz is arrested and his case goes to trial. So the film was written and directed by the great David Lean, and this was, of course, his final film as a director. And the cast includes Judy Davis as Adela, Peggy Ashcroft as Mrs. Moore, Victor Banerjee as Dr. Aziz, Nigel Havers as Ronnie, James Fox as a local school superintendent, Richard Fielding, and Alec Guinness as Professor Narayan Godbole. So A Passage to India made $27 million at the box office and was nominated for 11 Academy Awards, winning 2, but not Best Picture. So, Tony, tell me about your relationship with A Passage to India.
It all, for me, starts with the novel by E.M. Forster. E.M. Forster is one of my absolute heroes in terms of literature. And we've heard his name come up at the Oscars before. He was the author of Howard's End,
which I covered.
which is also one of my favorite books and one of my favorite films.
Yeah.
This, I actually remember seeing this in college when I was taking a class about contemporary, uh, early 20th century British writers, and that's really where I was exposed to E.M. Forster. And we watched A Passage to India, and this movie has really so much going for it. I mean, I've kind of an encyclopedic mind when it comes to this film, um, because I just love it so much. I think the only thing that really stopped this film from winning Best Picture was the bulldozer that was the actual winner, Amadeus, which is it kind of isn't really fair because I feel like '84, this particular year, was really, once Amadeus came out, it was over.
Hmm.
Amadeus was one of those bulldozers, but I think in another year, there's so much about this film that is uh, very much of its time, um, and is also in some ways kind of retro in a certain way because it harkens back to those great sweeping epics that, of course, somebody like David Lean is
Exactly.
so associated with it.
Hmm.
And there's so much to go into, particularly with Lean's involvement with this. Um, he had not made a film since he had not made a film in 14 years. His last like narrative motion picture was Ryan's Daughter in 1970, which, even though it won an Oscar for John Mills for supporting actor that year, the movie was savaged by critics, so much so that a particular critic, David Lean, made the mistake of actually asking the critics why they hated that movie so much. And a bunch of critics, I think it was at the New York Film Critics Circle, told David Lean to his face that they couldn't imagine how the director of so many wonderful films made a piece of S like Ryan's Daughter. And he was so stung by the criticism, he didn't make another film until this came along. He had made a documentary for the BBC, I believe, in the late 1970s, but had not made a narrative film since then. And so Lean is one of those last types of directors, like John Ford or William Wyler, people of that era who could make these sweeping epics and still make them in a way that's visually interesting, that's dramatically interesting, and again, Lean had multiple nominations this year. He, wrote the screenplay. He was also, because he got a start in editing, he also edited all of his own films and was nominated for editing as well.
Yeah.
So this was certainly not this was a beloved film. Critics just really went out of their minds for this film, and it's easy to see why. It ticks so many boxes.
Yeah. And specifically, Roger Ebert had, I read his review, and he actually mentioned that it was one of like the best book to film adaptations that there's ever been. So, yeah, very much a beloved film at the time. I don't know about its reputation right now. I don't know that a lot of people even go back to the film, honestly. Despite, like you said, I think it is actually a very, very good film. I do think it has flaws. I won't say it's a masterpiece, but yeah, I'm a little bit surprised that it doesn't quite have the same level of resonance today. Because yeah, I think it does have that really beautiful sweeping tone to it. It is almost 3 hours long, but I do think that it earns every minute of that. I think it takes its time to tell its story in the right way. And all of the little things in the beginning seem to pay off at the end. There's a lot of simmering racial tension in the beginning that really very much bubbles over by the end of this film. And I think that arc is one of the best in the film. And, you can even make comparisons to what's happening today between various communities and classes that I think are very relevant. So there's a lot to take from this film. So it's hard to know even where to start. But
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons why it seems a little bit dated, um, I think, starts with the subject matter. Because even though there are clear, you can make those clear parallels. The era of British colonialism, it does seem such a distant memory,
mhm.
that but people often forget. This was the era. This is 3 years after, this is 2 years after Gandhi won Best Picture at the Oscars. I mean, so colonialism has always been was certainly more popular of a film topic, going through the 80s. But I think it lost kind of its resonance. I think people thought that kind of empire-based mentality, which we saw a lot in that time. I think people kind of thought that was the thing of the past. But I think it's kind of reared its ugly head with the kind of both the class and racial struggles that we see. And I think it's a movie that deserves a second look.
Yeah.
I think people need to rediscover this film.
Yeah. And it does actually share some of the same qualities that A Room with a View and Howard's End both have, which is this idea that was presented in Howard's End of only connect, this idea of bridging the gap between different communities, different cultures, different classes. And I also just took note of the fact that Mystic River is a little bit similar. Now, work with me here in that it is very much this mystery that eventually comes about, and it's about accusations, and it's about relationships and how they can fracture and what happens to a community when big things like this happen. So in some ways it's quite good that you're on this show as well as from Mystic River. So I just thought I'd throw that out there now.
No, I think it's a perfectly relevant thing, and it's also very interesting to me that you mentioned things like Howard's End and A Room with a View, both Merchant Ivory films.
Yeah.
And really, one of the it was not a rival for Best Picture, but did get several nominations. Was really a landmark Merchant Ivory production called The Bostonians, with Vanessa Redgrave, that was also this particular year. So it's kind of interesting to see those two worlds. If you didn't know anything about the fact that A Passage to India was directed by David Lean, you might think that it was a Merchant Ivory film.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Until you start seeing some of those really like grand scapes that he manages to capture. One of the famous quotes about David Lean is that there are some directors who will wait all day for the perfect sunset, and David Lean was one of those directors that will wait several months for the perfect sunset. He was not afraid to take his time and was notorious for it.
Right. Yeah. And honestly, it does pay off because I do think the film looks absolutely gorgeous. And the way he captures the landscapes and the caves and mountains and hills and valleys and everything, even in addition to the indoor scenes as well, I think it's all really interestingly choreographed, I guess. So yeah, you can really tell that this is a master just completely controlling this entire film.
And what I love, I think the cave sequences, it's interesting you bring up the cave sequences because I think those are among the most interesting. David Lean was certainly known for, again, these really grand scapes of Lawrence of Arabia, Bridge on the River Kwai, but the way he can capture a really claustrophobic environment like those cave sequences. I mean, when Peggy Ashcroft's character runs out of the cave, the sound and the editing, it all works together so well, and it's again a testament to Lean, who was not a director who made that many films over the course of his career. He started as an editor, and but as a director, has really in opposition to some of his contemporaries, he directed very few films in comparison, and so I think this is a film that somehow got lost in his catalog, but I really do hope people take the time to take a look at it again.
Yeah, it is. Again, it's a commitment. It's almost 3 hours, but I do think it is something worth ruminating over. And I almost wonder, looking at the various themes in this film, how it would hold up today to kind of a culture where there's a lot of think pieces and a lot of heavy discussion of what certain things mean, within the text of the film. So we'll definitely get into some of those. let's just talk about this story itself and how it lures you in. Like the first 90 minutes or so, I think are not necessarily plotless, but certainly do a lot of setting up what is to come in the second half of the film. Did you find yourself like, engaged with what they were doing for that first half?
I think a lot of it has to do with the performances of this film. This is a beautifully cast film, and Judy Davis really, had been more known uh, outside the United States for her work, and was still relatively unknown. I think she was, maybe in her 20s
Mm-hmm.
when she did this film, and here she is carrying a movie directed by David Lean, um, and her character is so interesting to me because in many ways, and it's very much this way in the book, and I think the comparison of the book and the film really holds up because it really is a faithful adaptation without being uh, too booky. It's a seamless, real adaptation. But Judy Davis's character really is, in many ways, a woman ahead of her time. Um, Adela is certainly more free thinking, and has this kind of free spirited attitude that really, I think, represents a lot of what a lot of young people in Britain were probably feeling at that time when it came to colonialism
Mm-hmm.
and India. Um, and in many ways, what happens to her is almost symbolic of the struggle between, because she finds herself, kind of drawn back into this, us versus them mentality that I think shakes her to her core. And then you have Peggy Ashcroft's character, and I could talk for hours about my absolute adoration for Peggy Ashcroft, Dame Peggy Ashcroft. And I'm sure we'll get into her Oscar win. But she, that on paper is a character that you think, okay, insert British grand dame here. Um,
Right.
but Peggy Ashcroft brings just a certain levity to it, and yet both a levity and a gravity to it that is so appealing that you just watch it and go, yeah, this is what a great character actress can bring to a part that on the surface anybody can play, because she's both, has that haughtiness and that kind of sly wit that you
Mm-hmm.
want in a character like this. But yet when it's there, there's a real just depth to that character. This is not just a stock character by any means, and I think a lot of it is in E.M. Forster's writing. But you put an actress like Peggy Ashcroft in that role, and it's magic what she does.
Yeah, Peggy Ashcroft. Every single minute she's on screen is a joy. I think she manages to just give this character such easy charisma almost, where you just want to hang on to her every word because she is also very much ahead of her time, very, liberal and really appalled by the way that the British people are treating the Indian community. I just found her to be such a pleasure to watch. And she doesn't really have any big grandstanding scenes that would make you be like, oh, this is, this obvious performance. This is why she won. I think it's just the nature of how she carries herself and is just so effortless that is part of why she won, in addition to her being herself, but there's always that. As far as Judy Davis, I think she brings a lot to the role, but I did want to talk about this character because it's something that people struggle with. And I have to admit that I've struggled a bit in the beginning to figure out exactly who this person is. And we do see her, much like Mrs. Moore, being very kind of appalled by the way that Indians are treated. But I was trying to really suss out exactly who this person is as the film was going on, because she seemed very meek. She doesn't say too much, and she's very reserved a lot. A lot of it is facial acting on her part. But by the end, I think she really brings it home, especially by the trial, and the aftermath of that, especially, is really powerful. But yeah, what did you think of just the way that the character of Adela is treated in the arc that she's on?
Well, it was interesting when I rewatched the film. what was interesting to me was really how fragile the character is underneath this kind of outward strength that she seems to have. And to me, remembering the book the way I remember it, it's almost kind of like, she kind of represents what the United Kingdom was at that time, which was kind of in flux, um, unsure of where they are.
Mm,
And I think as the film goes on, it presents her with, just like at one point Britain was presented with, this fork in the road of, do we assert ourselves and keep the Indians under our feet, or do we let them, have their independence, and in doing so become better people ourselves?
mm,
Um, and I feel like she is kind of the conduit for that. If there's a flaw, particularly in the book, I think that metaphorical thing is a little more heavy-handed in the book and a little bit less in the movie. But I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that Judy Davis, you know, there's never 1 second when I'm watching Judy Davis where I don't think that she knows exactly who her character is. I always feel like I see an actress in total control
yeah.
of her, of what we might not know, but I never feel like she can do so much with a look, just a slight turn of her head, or a tilt of her head or something like that, that it's just the kind of acting that I don't think uh, you see. There's a certain old school quality to it that is, kind of like David Lean's, but there's also kind of a new energy to it, a modern energy to it.
Yeah.
I think she's perfectly cast,
Hmm.
quite frankly.
And a lot of people talked at the time as well about how she can be, very strikingly beautiful in certain scenes, and to a point where you see where she's this beguiling person, but at other times you kind of see her as plain, and in a way that, she's just a regular woman. She has this really interesting quality about her that makes her very much a chameleon in whatever she needs to do in the particular scene in a particular movie. So yeah, she's, yeah, one of the best.
If you get Meryl Streep on live television to say that that Judy Davis gave one of the great performances of all time
Yeah.
in the Judy Garland film, you're doing something right.
Exactly. Yeah. And I am hoping that she is able to get back to this level of acting again. We saw it a little bit in Feud Betty and Joan, where she plays Hedda Hopper, but really hoping that she can return to this level of meaty material in a film that hopefully the Oscars can take notice of, because, she only has 2 nominations. Here she is all these years later. I think she's probably earned it by now. But
And she was notoriously upset on her second nomination. She was the front runner, really, going into the '92 Oscars for Husbands and Wives, when Miss Tomei
yes,
swiped it out from under her.
that's another story.
That's another podcast.
Yes. But I also wanted to talk about Victor Banerjee, because he is very charismatic, I think, and very eager, very full of life, and another one of these actors and characters that I found myself just always wanting to watch them and to see what they're doing, because he just brings such an energy to the film as Dr. Aziz. And again, his journey to being this sort of optimist in the beginning, wanting to make this connection with the British people, and then becoming kind of jaded by the end, I think was a very smartly told arc as well.
And also jaded, and yet there's a hint of optimism that
Right.
maybe there's maybe that there can ultimately be healing,
Yeah.
um,
Which pays off in the end, of course.
which totally pays off in the end. um, and it's interesting that he never really did a whole lot after this, outside of India, which I think is a shame, quite frankly, because he really is he's really quite charming in this,
He really
and
is.
you become invested in him immediately, so that what happens to him later has a much greater emotional weight. That if you don't care about that character as much, that you're not as invested in what happens to him, and it really gives a level of pathos, so that it's not so that it's more than just he's more than just a device in the plot.
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't actually read the book, sadly, but I did read that Dr. Aziz in the book is a little more cynical at times in the beginning compared to what the film does, which is present him as this super eager, energetic guy who just really wants to befriend all of the British people. Meanwhile, from what I understand in the book, it's a little more presented as like him understanding the British rule over the Indian community being such an oppressive thing. But
Yeah, he comes in the book. He comes across as I would call him an optimistic realist.
right,
He
okay.
understands the situation, but he always thinks that it eventually could get better.
Hmm.
Um, I don't think it takes anything away that he's more optimistic in the film. If anything, because it's more of a with a film, you can't always necessarily go for that amount of subtlety. And
Yeah.
David Lean, not the most subtle of directors, but who was in that era,
Yeah, especially in this particular Oscar race.
especially in this particular Oscar race.
Not a
Hello.
lot of subtlety here, but yeah.
Yes, when I think of Amadeus, I think subtle.
Yes, just so restrained. Yeah, so let's talk about the sort of inciting incident that happens at the middle portion. Because really a lot of the film hinges on how this scene is portrayed. Did you think that the way that the incident on the mountain in the caves was well portrayed?
It's very accurate. It's
Yeah,
very accurate because it's completely ambiguous. Um, it's completely ambiguous in the book
right.
what happens in that moment. Um, if anything, I think there's a really famous quote that that Judy Davis gave when she was talking to David Lean about being in this film, and she described it as Adela having her kind of unable to cope with her own kind of spiritual and sexual awakening, and at that moment, David Lean gave her the part. Um, which is really interesting because that's not necessarily what any of us might think of when we're watching the film. Um, but the fact that it is so ambiguous that it's also a sign of her kind of questioning everything. Like, oh, I thought I was this real liberal person, and maybe I'm not. It's a much about her own self doubt as anything else. And I think if they had, a lesser writer or director, I think would have turned that into some sort of suspenseful action sequence. And I think the way Lean does it is so perfect because it's just ambiguous enough
Exactly. Yeah, it's so
that
artfully crafted.
if you aren't familiar with the source material, if you haven't read the book, you're questioning
Yeah, which I was. So,
what
yeah,
happened.
exactly.
So we watched it with two different lenses, me
Mhm.
having been familiar with the book and so knowing what was coming. So I'm looking at it from the point of view of how are they going to film this? How is this going to be portrayed? And you're going into it, kind of just looking at it going, what just happened?
Yes, what exactly happened here? There's a lot of it feels like there's something missing happening. And yeah, because it's a lot of her kind of in the belly of the cave, I guess you could call it, just being overwhelmed, crying, sweating, being very frightened. We see him, Dr. Aziz, at the edge of the cave. We don't really see them ever connecting at all. And he's on the hunt looking in different caves. Suddenly she's going down the mountain and she's in shatters. It's a very chaotic, but I think it's, watching the film by the end, I think the way that is presented is so smart in giving us that suspense without being cheap and making it so uncertain what exactly is the truth. in the end.
And I think what you just said was really kind of spot on when you said that she's really in the belly of the cave, which is metaphorical of, like, a lot of British people at the time, you know, like a lot of people tend to do, is they look at things that they don't like from a distance, and they don't see it. So because they don't see it on a daily basis, they think it doesn't affect them or doesn't impact them, and they don't have to have an opinion about it. But here she is in literally the belly of this, and now she's confronted with all of these different things. And so it's really a crisis, not just uh, of her own self. It's a crisis of her own views of things, of her truth, of what happens when you're actually confronted uh, with the thing that you've kept at arm's length.
Right. And it's so interesting that like none of this is presented through any sort of narration or like, any clear indication, quote unquote, of what exactly she is going through. But at the same time, I feel like I understood it because of also what she had previously gone through, which is going off on her own and finding this sort of burial ground sort of thing where there's all these sexual sort of images happening around her, and she's kind of becoming verklempt, like just
Verklempt slash aroused
yes,
slash
just very
confused.
overwhelmed, and yeah, bringing a lot out of her repression, I think. And from there, we get her, talking to Ronnie, being like, "Oh, of course I want to be with you," and eventually it gets to this going up into the mountain in the cave, and she's more confused than ever. She doesn't know what she wants. And yeah, I do think that you understand exactly what she is going through if you're paying attention to the film, because I do think it
Yeah,
is subtle, but yeah.
and that's one of the things. That's one of the strengths of E.M. Forster as a writer in general, is that his narration is not. If you read any of his books, you really his narration is very introspective without ever telling you exactly everything. Um, he does a lot more indirect characterization than he does direct. He never necessarily tells you everything that a character is thinking. He leaves it just ambiguous enough. I always think about that scene in particular. Um, but you also think about when Mrs. Moore leaves. She feels in her heart that Dr. Aziz is being accused,
Hmm.
and yet she can't stay around to say it. She won't stay for the trial.
Right.
Um, and so there is still that pull, that push and pull of the old, you know, British colonialism versus, I want to be this new enlightened person. And it's that tug that people have, that's so just beautifully ambiguous.
Exactly.
It's always the term I use with the M. Forsters. There's a lot of beautiful ambiguity
Right.
in his
For sure.
character.
Yeah. And going to the sort of the second half of the film, I think the way that the trial is handled and the hubbub around it, I think, is very realistic and smartly told, because it makes total sense that in this Indian community where they are constantly being mistreated by the Brits, that they would take up this cause of Dr. Aziz being accused of rape as sort of a calling of, wanting to support him and come together as a community. It makes total sense, and I think the way that it's portrayed is very well done. And the
And it
trial itself,
also it also shows, I think, the ability of certain characters to just turn on each other. You get the British characters turning on each other,
mm-hmm, in a big way.
when
Yeah.
in a big way. And so there's the theme of the push and pull is so consistent throughout that you never, yeah, even with all the exposition at the beginning, it all lends to this same theme that I think is central to both the book and the film. And when you have a movie that's that dense, um, you need a David Lean it takes somebody of that caliber to really just make sure that every beat is being hit in a way that's just perfect for an audience to see it.
exactly.
We don't get films like this anymore.
They don't make them like they used to. This is one of those films where you feel that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And even down to someone like Fielding, who we haven't talked much about. He one of the best things I read just about him in, again, the Roger Ebert review, is describing him as one of those tall, lonely, middle-aged Englishmen who hang around the edges of stories set in the Empire, waiting until their destiny commands them to take a firm stand. I just love that quote because it's so perfect for who he is. And again, he really is kind of in the background of a lot, and he doesn't affect too much until the end when he is called upon to really defend his friend here, and is considered somewhat of a traitor to his community in some regard. So,
And I don't know if you're aware of this, but David Lean's first choice to play that role was Peter O'Toole.
there you go.
And
Yeah.
and it would have been interesting, but I've always thought that James Fox was a really just strong character actor. And I think that he never really got necessarily the leading roles that he deserved, but when he gets a really good part, he's so talented, and so, like, he's oftentimes been cast as these quintessentially uh, British characters, very much the uptight British characters. I'm thinking
Yes.
of particularly of his role as Lord Darlington in The Remains of the Day, which is one of my absolute favorite films. It's also my favorite Anthony Hopkins performance.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
and
a masterpiece. Yeah.
yeah,
Book is
but
great too, by the way.
yeah, we're reading it in my book club right now. Actually, that was my choice.
Yes.
Um,
Nice.
but James Fox is a great character in this film, and another one that is almost a little surprising is of course Alec Guinness as the professor. Um,
Yeah.
and Alec Guinness and David Lean certainly have a contemptuous relationship.
Yes, very
That
much so.
Yeah, I mean, the famous story that Alec Guinness, both of them wanted to make a Gandhi film, but they quarreled over that and didn't speak to each other. And then apparently a lot of Guinness's scenes got left on the cutting room floor, and they didn't talk to each other
Yeah.
again.
I mean,
But
he doesn't exactly have a lot to do here, at least in the final cut. I don't know
yeah,
if it's any
his role is
different.
more expanded. It's his role is more expanded in the book.
Yeah.
Uh, Um, but I mean, come on, Alec Guinness. I mean, David Lean got you an Oscar already, so you're good.
Yeah.
And you're Obi-Wan. I know you hate that, but
Yes, he
yeah.
resents it, but it's who he is. Yeah, and the casting there is a little iffy and would certainly not hold up by today's standards, as we know. But even by
No,
those standards, even in 1984, I don't know if it's that great either. But
no. It doesn't reach Mickey Rooney and Breakfast at Tiffany's level,
yes, well,
but
nothing can reach that
well,
level.
yeah, talk about aiming low,
Mm,
um, but to me, I mean, this film really does come down uh, to Peggy Ashcroft and Judy Davis.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and I'm sure we'll talk more about them in a minute.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, it's a very powerful and emotional story if you're willing to invest in it. Again, it's not something that's totally going to hold your hand about things all the way through. I think if you really get into it, I think honestly, like you said, all of the Forster adaptations, especially like A Room with a View and Howard's End, have been maybe criticized for being a little too cold. But I think if you're willing to invest in it and get get yourself in with the characters, I do think it's rewarding every single time.
One of the great things about Forster, just if you read, anything of his, is that his stories are so quintessentially British, but what he's talking about, class, race relations, things like that, I think they still hold up.
Yeah,
I
it's
think that
universal.
I
Hmm.
think and I've said this on Gold Derby, and I've said this many times, is that the Howard's End film is a masterpiece, and I think the miniseries, the Stars miniseries from this past year, was just it to me, it's unforgivable that it didn't get the respect that I think it deserves.
Mhm.
Because it's a great feminist tale in a time when a lot of people weren't writing about feminism. He has these strong female characters
Yeah,
as the center, and I say we need as many of those as we can get.
absolutely. And this is a great example of that. So I have a feeling there's still a lot of people who haven't in my audience who may not have seen A Passage to India, but I do recommend that you watch it and give it a chance. So,
Yeah.
any last words?
I do want to talk a little bit about the Oscars that year, or are we going to talk about that later?
That's on the next segment. Yes.
Next segment. Okay, we'll get
Yes.
to that. I'll save it.
Okay.
I'll save it.
All right.
I have thoughts.
Oh boy. Okay. So when we come back, we will be discussing why A Passage to India lost Best Picture to a very big movie called Amadeus.
A passage to a land of spellbinding mystery. Intriguing, irresistible, exotic. A land of painful paradox and magnificent splendor.
Are those the Malabar Hills? With the caves?
Professor Godberry, have you seen the caves?
Oh, yes. They are all the same, empty and dark.
I do so hate mysteries.
Mrs. Moore!
That enigma which is India enticed a young Englishwoman,
Oh, no.
I am Douglas Fairbanks!
drew her with an attraction that became an obsession.
Dr. Aziz, may I ask you something rather personal? Did you love your wife when you married her?
We were a man and a woman. And we were young.
This question?
Her obsession caused an echo
Adela?
which would reverberate through the whole subcontinent.
I've had 25 years' experience of this country, and I've never known anything but disaster result when English and Indians attempt to be intimate.
What happened that day at the caves of Malabar would change her life and haunt India forever. David Lean's film of E.M. Forster's A Passage to India.
And we're back. So now we are going to discuss why A Passage to India lost Best Picture to Amadeus. A Passage to India earned 11 Oscar nominations, tying with Amadeus. It earned nominations in Best Picture, Best Director for David Lean, Best Actress for Judy Davis, Best Supporting Actress for Peggy Ashcroft, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Art Direction, Best Cinematography, Best Costume Design, Best Film Editing, Best Original Score, and Best Sound. And it walked away with 2 of those, for Best Supporting Actress for Peggy Ashcroft and for its original score. And before the Oscars, it didn't necessarily win any huge Best Picture prizes, but it did win numerous critics awards, including New York Film Critics and the National Board of Review. It also won 3 Golden Globes, including one for Best Foreign Film. I don't know the logistics of exactly how that happened, but regardless, Amadeus won the Golden Globe for Best Drama and the DGA. So let's talk about why the Academy chose, of these 11 nomination films, why they chose Amadeus over A Passage to India.
God, where do we start? Amadeus is a brilliant film. I mean, I as a classical music fan, particularly as an opera lover, any time I have to spend 2.5 hours listening to Mozart, good, I'm good to go. But Amadeus also came in with a certain cachet to it. It's based on a Tony-winning play. Um, and that play was from 1981, so it was a little more recent in people's minds. This great theatrical triumph. The original play starred Tim Curry as Mozart and Ian McKellen as Salieri. He won the Tony for that performance, and then you have it's a big costume drama, historical drama, real life people. Is the story true? No. People actually, I love. Did Salieri poison No, it's in the play.
Is this the real story?
Is this the real story? A lot of people thought it was a biopic.
Yeah, that's what I saw.
And which is fine. It's a brilliant film, and it just ticked. If you've got two period dramas, which one has more prestige, more cachet, which is something new? And you got to go with Amadeus. I mean, only somebody like Milos Forman, who's part of the new wave and made a film like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, can then take a big stuffy costume drama and still make it feel just as revolutionary and just as modern as anything else. It was a no-brainer, and the fact that it walked away with 8 of the 11, it was pretty much a done deal, I think, as soon as people saw that film.
Yeah, for sure. And I do think that the film also, even though I do love both of these films, I do think Amadeus is the bigger technical achievement, and I also think that it manages to maybe excite an audience a little more than A Passage to India might. There's a lot of rousing scenes. It's quite melodramatic in the best ways in certain parts. And it's just led by these two incredible performances that are incredibly showy as well. Especially Tom Hulce, who was just hamming it up like nobody's business in the best way.
Yeah. So when I say, the original Salieri, who was Tim Curry, you're like, oh yeah, that tracks.
Exactly. Yeah. And Ian McKellen. Yeah, I actually would love to see that just in general, that version. But yeah, Amadeus, I think it's a clear winner, even though I think, if you compare it to the film that won the very next year, Out of Africa, I think you might be more inclined to say, well, A Passage to India seems like it might be more in the Academy's wheelhouse. This sweeping epic that takes place in this foreign land and dealing with all these different issues. But, Amadeus really manages to stand the test of time, I think, even more than A Passage to India. And
sure as hell more than Out of Africa.
Well, that is very true. We talked all about that last week.
But good thing I wasn't on that one.
Yes. Yeah, I have no positive feelings really on that film outside of the lovely score. But regardless, Amadeus, I think, is a masterpiece. It's one of the best picture winners, in my opinion. Definitely one of the best of the 80s. Probably the best for me. Although it's a dead heat between that and Ordinary People, but we'll save that for a few weeks.
Ooh.
Yes.
I agree with you on that. I agree.
Ooh.
I completely agree with you on that.
Yay.
I've been a staunch defender of Ordinary People for many, many, many years.
I'm so glad that these days I've noticed on film Twitter that people are starting to appreciate that film so much more now.
Yeah.
But
the 84 Oscars, let's talk about the 84 Oscars just as a ceremony.
Yes, okay.
That people look back at that and they go, oh yeah, that was the year of Sally Field winning and going, you like me, you really like me. But there was a lot of stuff in that ceremony. Where do you want to start?
There was an elephant on stage. Let's start there.
Yes.
In the best costume design presentation at the Oscars, they did that thing where they go out and present it like it's they all go out live in the costumes, and it's a cute little montage thing. And this time around, they're like, okay, it's a passage to India. There's an elephant in this movie. Let's have an elephant.
Because why not?
Because we can. Because it's the 80s and we can.
The hair is big. The animals might as well be big too.
Yes.
So, but yeah. there was all. I mean, there was also, famously, we tend to think of the Best Picture presentation in, the catastrophe of Moonlight and La La Land, but really one of the first that I have a conscious memory of was Amadeus being announced Best Picture. Lord Laurence Olivier.
Mm-hmm. You want to explain what happened there?
Yes. So Lord Laurence Olivier comes out to present Best Picture, and he's in his twilight years.
Yes.
In fact, it was actually quite well known that he was, in the early stages of dementia at that time. And he comes out and, says this lovely thing about, these films are wonderful films, and I'm so happy to be here to present Best Picture. And he says, and he just opens the envelope, doesn't read the nominees. And you can actually hear people in the background going, no, read the nominees. You can hear these like scuttling in the background. And he just opens the envelope and says, and the winner of this is Amadeus. And so
I love it.
And you see the audience is kind of confused. Like, it's kind of that like, are we supposed to be clapping now? Is this what's supposed to be happening?
Yes.
And
is this real?
Saul Zaentz, the producer, gets up there, and bless his heart, Saul Zaentz, the producer, gets up there and very, very graciously in his speech, names the 4 other films nominated. But
yes.
it was amazing.
Yeah, and I will include that clip in the next break so that you can hear it for yourself, because it's quite amusing.
And even among we talk about the great Peggy Ashcroft winning her Oscar, and she wasn't there.
Yeah.
And one thing that I found out, I knew that she wasn't there because she had done a great deal of stage work. Peggy Ashcroft did very few films over the course of her career, and was really known only in the London theater as being just this giant of the British stage, and did very few films. Didn't even want to do this film. In fact, there's a funny story about how she told David Lean, I'm 75. I don't want to do this. And he's like, well, guess what? I'm 75 too. And she's like, oh,
yeah.
Okay. But she had done a lot of stage work with Sir Michael Redgrave, the father of Vanessa and Lynn Redgrave, and he had passed away shortly before the Oscars, and so Vanessa Redgrave, who was nominated in Best Actress for The Bostonians, wasn't there and for the funeral, and Peggy Ashcroft was supposed to read something at the funeral, but she also didn't go to the funeral because she had the flu.
Yeah.
And Angela Lansbury accepted the award for her.
A lot of weird little things happening at this ceremony, and I know it wasn't exactly well reviewed at the time. I know someone said something to the effect of that it was like this long slog that was interrupted briefly by an elephant. So, yeah, I can understand why it probably isn't going to be one of the most watched ceremonies either, because I think it wasn't one of the most watched ceremonies of the 80s, because the caliber of the Best Picture nominees weren't exactly matching what the audience was watching in that particular year. Makes sense there.
Yeah, because you had films like The Killing Fields and Places in the Heart and A Soldier's Story. These were not box office barn burners.
Right. So you understand, But I wanted to get to a few questions relating to Amadeus, actually, because we got quite a few from Twitter wanting us to talk about Amadeus. This is partly involved with The Killing Fields as well. So this is from
good.
Yes, this is from Kevin Clowiter saying both F. Murray Abraham and Hang S. Noor dominated their categories this year, and both have been accused of blurring the line between lead and supporting. if Abraham and Noor had to compete against each other, who do you think would have come out on top?
Ooh, excellent question, because this actually applies to A Passage to India too. Because there was a great deal of discussion at the time about whether Peggy Ashcroft was lead or supporting.
Right.
In fact, at the BAFTAs, she
was
won
lead. She won in lead.
actress.
Yeah.
She won lead actress. Although I think Mrs. Moore is much more of a supporting role. But I think you bring up I think it's a good question. I still think that that Abraham probably would have won.
Yeah, I agree.
Because what you really have there is, the stage actor who hasn't really broken through in film versus, Hang Noor, who had never acted before.
Right.
And I think arguably Hang Noor is a lead in The Killing Fields. I think he is the lead of The Killing Fields.
He is very much the lead. By the end of that movie, he is like the movie. So
yes,
so
entire stretches of that film are on him. But I still think Abraham probably would have gotten it.
Yeah, there's just so much going on with that performance, and it's so theatrical and just so in their wheelhouse to want to give this an acting prize. So yeah, I mean, I do love Haggas Noor in the film. I think for this to be his film debut, having not acted before at all, he brings a lot of life to that film, and it's a lot of life experience too.
Yes,
as we know,
please, listeners, The Killing Fields is a wonderful film to revisit.
Yes.
And Noor's performance, that was one of those instances where, sometimes a performance that's a lead performance in a supporting category can be annoying. I was not annoyed by that at all. And if you go back and you watch Noor's acceptance speech, he's so happy and so overjoyed. And he was an actor that was tragically died too soon.
Yeah, I know. I think it's also one of these things where we see a lot of younger performers competing in the supporting categories. In a way, it's kind of what certain studios do when they know that a star is very new, so the likelihood of them winning a leading Oscar is not very likely, so they go in supporting. It's one of these situations, but I definitely think, I mean, again, yeah, I will agree that I'm not annoyed particularly that he won an Oscar in Best Supporting Actor, but I do think it's fraud, sadly.
Yeah.
So it is what it is.
It's a fraud that we'll let go.
It's a fraud that I accept, yes. So speaking of that, Ed Stevens asked, had Tom Hulce been campaigned as supporting instead of lead, do you think he would have won?
No. Again, this goes back to we still talk about this when we talk about the Oscars now, is we talk about narratives. Who has the narrative, and a real life Cambodian, a person who went through all that stuff
and more,
who was a Cambodian who was a victim of the Khmer Rouge, who lived through all of that, and then to come out and give a really great performance. He had the narrative that Tom Hulce, as great as he is, doesn't have.
Right. Exactly. I think I agree with that. And I also think Tom Hulce is a lead in Amadeus regardless. So
the movie's called Amadeus.
Yes, it is.
He plays Amadeus.
I say it every week. It is the titular role. So
I always love an opportunity to put the word titular in something. I don't know why.
It's a fun word.
It's a great word.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of interesting combinations of two leading performances that would be competing in the same category between The Killing Fields and Amadeus, and possibly A Passage to India as well, some would argue. Interesting calibration of what happened here. Two more Amadeus questions before we move on to the other Best Picture nominees in this field. This is from Josh Parham, who asked, would you nominate anybody else in Amadeus's supporting cast?
Ooh, You want to take that one? I don't even know where I'd start.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know. I don't think that there was anyone else outside of Abraham and Hulse who really stood out. Maybe Jeffrey Jones as the Emperor, but I'm leaning towards no.
Yeah, I mean, I think a case could be made for Elizabeth Barrage as Constanza, his wife.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that, when you have I don't think that was enough of a breakthrough of a character.
Right.
I think maybe if a bigger name had played that part,
For sure. Yeah.
I think then we might be talking about it.
Yeah. And this is from Matt Neglia, who asked, Amadeus lost both cinematography and film editing to The Killing Fields. Deserved or undeserved, in your opinion?
Deserved on editing. I think The Killing Fields is so beautifully edited and so wonderfully tense, particularly that whole middle section with Hang Nor's character. It's a beautiful job.
Mm-hmm.
Cinematography, this is one that they could go a number of places, even though Amadeus in many ways feels like a bigger movie than it actually is, but there's actually, just quite a lot of it is interior.
A lot of interiors. Yep. Exactly.
So I think maybe Passage to India with its bigger scope, and Amadeus with its kind of prestige thing. I think maybe that they might have split and left room for Killing Fields. I think the cinematography win for the Killing Fields has always kind of been like, really, you went for that?
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's undeserved. It's a wonderfully made film, but it's surprising that they went for that.
Yeah. Well, honestly, if it was between the two of them, I would probably still lean towards The Killing Fields, but I would probably go third party here and say A Passage to India deserved it over both of them, because I do think it is such a meticulously crafted film, from the interiors to everything I said in the first half of the show. Of all of the shots of the mountains and the caves are so well crafted. So
yeah,
I think that's what I would actually go for. So, good transition point for us to talk, I guess, about The Killing Fields itself. For me, I think Amadeus for me is a clear number one here, but if I was to, rank it between The Killing Fields and A Passage to India, I would have a lot of trouble, because I think they're both really great films.
I completely agree with you. I mean, in thinking about it, I not only rewatched Passage to India, but I also rewatched The Killing Fields.
There we go.
Amadeus, I practically have committed to memory, but
yeah.
Yeah, the Killing Fields is such a ambitious. Sometimes it feels like kind of like a real gritty independent film.
Yes.
And then there's also this kind of cinematic aspect to it. But a really, really strong film, and always made me wonder why Sam Waterston wasn't more of a film star than he was.
I know. Yeah.
Because it's a great, great performance that he gives.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that film.
Yeah.
And it's surprising. What was surprising in rewatching is how well it holds up. It doesn't feel dated or anything. I feel like that movie could be made today and, restored digitally or something like that. And
for sure.
I think it holds up.
Yeah.
Roland Joffe, an underrated director, sometimes his own fault.
But this is his feature film debut, which is kind of nuts to me, that like you can come out of the gate with this kind of a film. And
yeah, it always bothered me that he never had another film really of this caliber.
Yeah.
Despite clear attempts.
Well, a few years later, he did have The Mission, which is Best Picture nominated, of course. But from there, it's really, really trickles down. And this is from San Diego Cinerama, who said, Roland Joffe, what happened? A career that started with The Killing Fields and devolved into torture porn not 20 years later.
Yeah. And apparently, also did some uncredited work on that really god-awful Super Mario Brothers screen.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Oh, dear. Yeah. I don't know what happened. I don't know.
It's a shame. It's a shame. But we've seen that happen before. We've seen directors come out of the gate with a great film, and then where did they go after that?
Yes. And it seems like they're going to set themselves up to be potentially a great director we all remember and love. And then, well, not so much. Yeah. The Killing Fields is fantastic. And I agree it does hold up, actually. And just watching it now, it does feel like even if you made it today, it would be a very powerful message that would really, really connect with people. And this is, again, it shares some similarities to A Passage to India in some ways of, this American journalist connecting with this Cambodian man. It's very much about connection and brotherhood and like the one world and all of that. So
yeah. See them. Let's have certain politicians in Washington watch The Killing Fields and then talk about caravans of people.
Exactly. Yeah,
I think a lot of go there, or I'll get angry.
I think a lot of people need to see this film. And I mean, some people talk about the ending scene being a little bit cheesy, especially with Imagine being at the end as the song, but
it was the 80s.
I can't deny that I teared up a little bit. It's a really a nice reunion that they have. So
subtlety hadn't totally worked its way into American filmmaking by 84. So
yes, I know. Yeah. So the other two films are decidedly less ambitious in scope, I guess you could say, which is Places in the Heart and A Soldier Story. So Places in the Heart actually wins 2 big Oscars, which is Best Actress for Sally Field and Best Original Screenplay.
Oh boy, does that one bother me.
Yeah. Some people love Places in the Heart. I think Sally Field is great in the film. I would say that. I don't know that the film really left any sort of lasting impression on me, to be honest.
That's a film that hasn't aged as well as it could have. It kind of, to me, just looks like a TV movie now.
It very much feels like a TV movie watching
if we actually had TV movies and not just episodes of Black Mirror, but again, another podcast.
Yes.
But you look at the other nominees for screenplay in that category. I mean, you have Splash, Beverly Hills Cop, a certain film by a director who I will not name, Woody Allen.
Yes.
And one of my all-time favorite films, El Norte, a film that had a profound impact on me when we watched it in middle school, and it had a really profound effect on me.
Mm-hmm.
Soldier Story is interesting in that it really, I was surprised that this got in. This was probably the one that surprised me the most.
Well, it gets 3 nominations. One of them is Best Picture. The other one is Supporting Actor for Adolph Caesar, and I believe the other one is Adapted Screenplay. So
Adapted Screenplay, yeah.
Yeah. And Norman Jewison.
Yeah.
This is the case of the Best Picture nominee that does not get into director, because Norman Jewison is replaced by Woody Allen. So I think The Soldier Story is a perfectly fine film. I don't have too many issues with it. I mean, there's some credit to be had for the fact that it is an all-black cast, and telling from a perspective of, how Black people in the 80s particularly felt like inside of its own community, as opposed to just having it be from like a white perspective. So there's some value to that, to be sure. I think Adolph Caesar is very good as well.
Yeah, and it gave us a very young Denzel Washington.
Yes.
Who had played the role on stage. It was only his second feature film, but he had played the same role in the stage production.
Yeah. Well,
it was originally called A Soldier's Play, and then when they adapted it for the screen, they turned it into A Soldier's Story. Thank God they didn't turn it into A Soldier's Movie. That would have just been the worst title ever.
That just sounds like a scary movie, like one of these,
or more adult themed film. Anyway,
yes. So yeah, I think Adolf Caesar actually would give Hang S. Nor a run for his money, because that is a particular performance that is very haunting for me, and yeah, I would not have minded if he won. I still would have picked Hang S. Nor, especially maybe, if I was an Academy member at the time, I would probably really be drawn in by his story, let alone his performance. So I can't help but feel like I would be more drawn to that. But
yeah, I mean, that was also a category that had Pat Morita for The Karate Kid.
Yeah.
And the late Sir Ralph Richardson for the Tarzan film Greystoke.
Yeah.
So it's a good category. It's ironic. I think a lot of the other categories were a lot better than Best Picture.
Yeah. Also, John Malkovich is in that category. He's the other guy in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he's had a
very young John Malkovich.
Yeah, one of his film debuts.
He was really the youngin' in that category.
If you can believe it, yeah.
If you can believe it.
John Malkovich is the ingenue of the category.
I don't think I've ever heard anybody refer to Malkovich as an ingenue. That's amazing.
You heard it here first, folks. But he had something very odd and interesting to say, because I was reading Inside Oscar before this, and he had some kind of non-PC things to say about his particular chances in this category, and was rather distasteful. I don't know if it was for comedic effect. He just
what did he say?
He basically talked about how this category is filled with minorities and a dead guy, so I think my chances are pretty good. So
I hope that was tongue-in-cheek.
I hope so. There was no mention of like the way he said that or context, but
I don't think you're supposed to refer to Ralph Richardson as a dead guy.
Well, that's John Malkovich for you. So
good grief.
He did not win, but he was also in The Killing Field, so he was one of these guys who was having a great year.
Yeah.
As well. But I mean, he's fine in Places in the Heart. Not particularly outstanding, to be honest. I don't really know why he's nominated. But Angry
Blind Man, it always works. It works for Al Pacino. So
I suppose so. Yes. So I'm curious, since I did this last week, about what your ranking would be of this Best Picture lineup.
Oh, I knew you were going to ask me that.
Did you?
I was afraid you would, because I would actually, Places in the Heart for me would go at the bottom. That's easy, and then Soldier's Story above that. 2 and 3, I have a really hard time with.
Yeah.
This ranking is absolutely no reflection of my thoughts on them as films. It's purely an emotional thing for me.
Sure.
I would put A Passage to India as second and Killing Fields as third, only because of really the visceral connection I have with both the book and the film.
That makes sense.
That said, if Killing Fields, like I have nothing but love for that film, but Amadeus is clearly first.
Yeah. I would say that my number 5 is sadly probably Places in the Heart, much as I love Sally Field. Number 4 is A Soldier's Story. Number 3 is probably A Passage to India. And number 2 is Killing Fields. Number 1 is Amadeus. So pretty similar. Really quite a drop off from after 3. But
yes.
But still, three epic films with a lot of things to say about them that everyone should check out. I think they should not be forgotten.
It's interesting, as I was going into this today, I was thinking, oh yeah, this is kind of a dull year, but the 3 films,
yeah,
are all of really, really high quality.
For sure.
I think if it were today, you'd have a hard time getting like 8 or 9 because this was not that big.
Yeah, I know. But just to fill out some of the rest of these questions here, this is from our friend Andrew Carden, who asked, A Soldier Story was the lone Best Picture nominee to not pick up an Oscar. Do you believe it deserved a win anywhere?
Well, it was only nominated for, you said 3, right?
For the 3, yeah. Best Picture, Best Supporting Actor for Adolph Caesar, and Best Adapted Screenplay.
I think I'm in agreement with you that I would, if Nor wasn't there,
Mm-hmm.
I think Adolph Caesar would be a deserved win.
Absolutely. That is what I would say. I actually probably wouldn't give it to any category, but if there were one, I would definitely say Best Supporting Actor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. So just going back to that, this is from Mark Lamb, who said, "Poor Norman Jewison. In the heat of the night, Best Picture winner. Norman loses to Mike Nichols for The Graduate. 1984, all the directors of the Best Picture nominees get nominated except Norman Jewison, who is replaced by Woody Allen for Broadway Danny Rose. What's up with that?"
I have absolutely no idea. And why Broadway Danny Rose? I mean that it's a film that only shows up in original screenplay, I think. Does it show up anywhere else?
Let me just do a quick check on that.
I'm looking, I don't see it anywhere else.
Nope, that's it. That is it. Directing and writing.
I mean, and it's a film that was certainly very critically acclaimed, but was, you know, I think its esteem has actually grown over time. I read somewhere that it's actually like considered in the top 10 of Allen's films.
Mm-hmm.
But really directing for that?
Her?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, because I mean, I don't really know, other than I guess general respect for Woody Allen usually helps, especially at this particular time, 70s, 80s. I can't really explain it, especially when Norman Jewison has pedigree of his own. So maybe it's just that it was on too small of a scale, that it wasn't as impressive directing. But I mean, Broadway Danny Rose certainly is on a smaller scale too. So I don't really know.
I mean, Soldier Story made, I think $20 million, whereas Broadway Danny Rose made 10.
So yeah, you can't even say that,
I can't even say that it was a more well-known film.
Yeah.
More widely seen. I mean, it's a mystery to me.
Yeah. Well, as we bridge the gap into our next segment, I wanted to talk about an interesting little pattern that people talk about from the Best Actress nominees this year. I'm sure you are probably familiar with where I'm going with this, but there are 3 nominees for Best Actress who happen to be playing basically women who are trying to save the farm. And that,
oh God.
Sally Field, of course, who wins for Places in the Heart, Jessica Lange for Country, and Sissy Spacek for The River. All of these movies come out in the same year, all of them pretty much similar themes, not necessarily in the same eras, but they had become known as the Dust Bowl trilogy.
Oh my God.
And so, let me see. I think Eoin Daly wanted us to talk about just our opinions on these 3 quote unquote farmer wives, and which one was our favorite. Sadly, I have to say that the only one that I've seen is Places in the Heart. I don't even know where I can see Country. I tried looking, it's nowhere. The River, sadly, I have not seen. So
I have seen The River, and it's fine. It's again talking about a film that could easily be a TV movie. I know there are some people, I've actually heard people say Oh yeah, didn't Sissy Spacek get nominated for that movie, The River Wild? It's like, no, that's Meryl Streep. She wasn't nominated for that. That's like the one film she wasn't nominated for. But it was really not a banner year for Best Actress that year. I have not seen Country.
Yeah.
It's so much so. I mean, this is like in Jessica Lange's where she practically got nominated every year, pretty much. I forgot that Country was not the one where she played Patsy Cline.
The one where she's not a country star.
That she's not a country star, but
Right.
that was Sweet Dreams 2 years later.
Right.
I guess I would have to say Sally Field by default.
Yeah.
She's very good in that film. I just think the film itself is a little slight.
Yeah, I agree.
I feel like if Places in the Heart had come out and saying like the the late 60s, maybe the 70s, I felt like it might have a little bit more resonance.
Mm-hmm.
But no.
But now, yeah, I don't know.
Oh, now? Oh no.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, honestly, like looking at that category, again, I haven't seen all of them, so I can't really speak to any expertise on which one exactly deserved it, but when you know that Sally Field already won for Norma Ray, there is some thought to be had that this could have gone to Judy Davis.
And I have to give a little bit of a shout out to Vanessa Redgrave, who, and The Bostonians is a very, very good film. Redgrave, I think she won either National Board of Review or National Society of Film Critics. I can't remember. I'd have to look that up. She's amazing in everything, and this was kind of like, she had been ostracized after her Oscar win somewhat, and so this was kind of a return to form for her. But I love The Bostonians. I think that movie's underrated.
Let's see if there's any other questions. Well, I guess just one more from Clay Bryce 72, who said, "Here's my question. Does anyone else find each and every one of these films dull, slow, and boring?" And it was from a picture of the Best Picture nominees. So
no, and no. Well, first of all, dull and boring, that actually they're all kind of synonyms. So I think a blanket no applies to that. even though I don't like Places in the Heart that much, I would not call it boring. Yeah. I would call it slight, but I wouldn't call it boring.
Yeah. I mean,
and if you're going to call The Killing Fields or Amadeus or Passage to India boring, then, we gonna brawl.
Oh boy.
Bring it.
You're gonna take off those earrings. Here we go. It's go time. Yeah. I think that sentiment just comes from the fact that some of these movies are clearly on the longer end. But again, if you do just choose to engage with them, then I think they're all rewarding in some way. So I wouldn't say that by any means. So, having said that, let's move on to our Should Have Been a Contender segment. This is other Best Picture nominees, not other Best Picture nominees, excuse me, other Oscar nominees that weren't nominated for Best Picture, or just any movie from 1984 that we particularly loved. So, Tony, bring it on.
Oh, this is an easy one for me. This is a really easy one for me.
Okay.
And I don't know how this film holds up because I haven't revisited it in some time. But John Carpenter's Starman, which earned a Best Actor nomination for Jeff Bridges, is a film that I remember seeing as a kid and just being completely in love with. And a lot of that has to do with Bridges, but I think Carpenter is underrated. When he's good, he's really, knows how to tell a story. And it doesn't matter how far-fetched and, on the surface, this is really the most un-Carpenter-esque film, in that it really just is a sentimental love story that still to this day, I just look back on it with such fond memories. I really need to revisit it, but I would love to have seen Starman in here.
Yeah. Sadly for me, I haven't seen a lot of the bigger, I guess, prestige-y films beyond the Best Picture nominees this year. So a lot of my films that I have for this particular segment are much more on the blockbuster side than usual, but I do think that many of them still do have value in some ways, including Ghostbusters. I'm just going to put that out there now.
Oh, nice.
Obviously a classic, very beloved, very funny. I love the cast. I love that particular group of SNL people to begin with, but it's excellent. It's a classic for a reason. Everyone knows Ghostbusters. I don't need to really get into explaining why you need to watch it, but
we don't. What's that movie about?
Oh, they bust ghosts.
Oh, wow.
I'm just gonna throw something in we mentioned before with Pat Morita, but The Karate Kid, another classic for me as a kid, and that performance from him is absolutely iconic. So I like
Absolutely.
that.
I can't disagree with that.
Yeah. I'm just gonna say The Terminator is another favorite of mine. I think T2 is certainly better, but it's The Terminator definitely sets things up well, and I think it's pretty underrated.
Oh, and I don't know if you've seen this film or not, but if you haven't, shame on you. This is Spinal Tap.
Yes, of course I have seen This is Spinal Tap.
Okay, good. Just checking.
Yeah, it's been a while, but I have seen it. Yes,
yeah, that's a film. That's a film that still makes me laugh. On a rainy day, if I want to laugh, I'm putting on Spinal Tap.
Yeah, and honestly, we have to talk about how that film was very influential for years to come, as far as the mockumentary, wave. So I think that is a film that deserves to be in original screenplay at the very least. So beyond that, I'm just gonna throw out Gremlins because I know it's absolutely insane, but it is total blast.
I could listen to Gremlins music. If I hear that music come on, I'm just like, yes, please, thank you.
Yeah, a wonderful.
Give me Gizmo, give me Dancing Gizmo, and I'm happy.
What a great Christmas movie that is. Did you have others that you wanted to mention?
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily nominate this for anything.
Well, we're not saying that it has to be nominated. We can still just appreciate these films.
But I would say there's one that automatically, since we were just talking about Best Actress, I had forgotten about this. I think Kathleen Turner in Romancing the Stone is just classic. I could watch her in that movie all day long. And of course, again, because it's my childhood, because unlike you, I was actually alive in 1984. And I remember this vividly is Footloose.
Oh, yeah, of course.
The good one, not the crappy remake the remake that shall not
for
be
a new
named.
Generation.
Yeah, dumb generation. No offense, listeners.
Thanks.
Unless you like that film, in which case, offense.
Oh boy. You're
Send your letters to me.
I love it. Yes. Go to Twitter at Gold Derby Tony.
Yep.
For all complaints.
Okay. Bring it. and a film that I think is also probably my favorite Steve Martin performance, and that is All of Me, with him and Lily Tomlin is just comedy gold.
I know there was a bit of a surprise that he did not that performance did not translate for the Oscars. That's from what I was reading from Inside Oscar. There were some disappointed people there. So,
well, there's again, it's the thing. One of the things that hasn't changed about the Oscars that they will never disappoint is their complete ignorance when it comes to comedy.
It continues all the way until
they'll give comedies in supporting till the cows come home, but you put it in lead, nope. Yeah.
It's really a shame. Just one other I wanted to mention was Hayao Miyazaki film from this year. One of my favorites that I always talk about. Hayao Miyazaki. Sadly, I forgot to mention My Neighbor Totoro back when that was out, so I'm just going to throw that in here now. But also, I'm going to say Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, which is a really fascinating kind of environmental kind of tale, about this girl who is saving this land from oncoming military and such. But it's a tale that a lot of people have obviously adapted to various stories throughout film history, but lovingly crafted as always by Hayao Miyazaki. So I just wanted to mention him here.
I will also throw in a sentimental favorite of Robin Williams in Moscow on the Hudson, which really was, after World According to Garp, which was certainly more lighthearted. But this was a really beautiful performance that he gives in this charming little film. It's not a big film at all, but it really does show you the depths that he got. I mean, he plays this Russian and just knocks it out of the park. Like, it's a real performance from Robin Williams.
That's always nice to see. I'm just looking over to see if there's anything else. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is solid. Slightly racist, but it's okay.
Yeah, that was a film I wasn't allowed to see until later.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm looking at the box office winners and losers from that year. One that I love every time it comes on TV because it is kind of laughably bad is the adaptation of Stephen King's Firestarter with a young Drew Barrymore as a 6-year-old girl who can start fires, and she's pursued relentlessly by George C. Scott in an eye patch.
Oh dear.
And there's also a very young Martin Sheen in that movie too. Art Carney's in that movie. Louise Fletcher's in that movie.
What a cast!
Yeah, and it's kind of laughable in ways that only the soundtrack for Firestarter, you could like play that over an episode of Stranger Things and it fits perfectly. That's a good one. But you can't go through 1984 and not mention the horror show that is Supergirl.
Okay. Yep. With
a very laughable, you thought Faye Dunaway was over the top in Mommy Dearest. Watch her as the villain in Supergirl. Oh my! It's a camp fest. Just 8 years after her Oscar win.
Oh dear. Well, yeah, she was on that track.
As they say, bless her heart.
Bless her heart. Well, we should probably talk about how there's a Glenn Close performance nominated here, The Natural.
Yes, a film I remember very vividly because we watched it when we were all playing Little League Baseball at the time.
Oh, okay, there you go.
So the team had a movie night and watched The Natural. I'm not sure how appropriate that was for kids.
This is baseball, so why not? Yeah.
Like it's Robert Redford and baseball. What could go wrong?
Could possibly go wrong? Yeah.
I remember being very confused by it.
Fair enough.
I was young and I thought that I was like, how come Glenn Close and I forget who was playing the other femme fatale in it?
Kim Basinger.
Kim Basinger, thank you. I just remember liking the film because I liked the ending when Robert Redford, with a leaking gunshot wound, hits a home run right into the lights, and it shatters the lights, and these sparks just fly all over the field, and us 6-year-olds are like, yay!
Of course. Yeah. There you
Baseball!
Go. I think we'll leave it at that. Yay, baseball.
Yay, baseball.
1984. Okay. So when we come back, we'll be delivering our verdict as to whether Amadeus deserved that Best Picture win or if A Passage to India possibly deserved it more.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you more than I have ever wanted or tried to thank anybody for such a perfectly wonderful reception. Thank you so much. I hope I won't let the occasion down too badly. I'm here to present the Best Picture Award, and the winner for this is Amadeus.
And we're back. So now we are going to be delivering our verdict as to whether Amadeus deserved that Best Picture win or if A Passage to India deserved it more. Tony, what is your verdict?
Amadeus deserved it more.
Amadeus.
It is one of the best films of the 80s. No questions asked.
Yeah, it's electrifying filmmaking. It's so dramatic and at times campy, but in the best way. Just the two lead performances are so great and the way that they interact with each other. And the ending is still quite haunting to me as Salieri is screaming about mediocrities. It's wonderful. So now I'm going to do a continuation of what I did last week, which is to open it up to all the Best Picture nominees and whether that would change our answer as to which of those films deserve to win. For you, I assume it's the same.
It's
Amadeus.
the same.
I agree. Amadeus of the five is the clear winner here. Now opening it up to 1984 in general. Does our answer change? Is there any film? Okay, no film. I agree. I think Amadeus is the definitive film of 1984. A younger me might not say that, but having matured into, its themes, appreciating it, I think it's the absolute clear number one of this year.
Fun fact, I actually saw Amadeus for the first time when I was 12.
Oh, wow.
And it's a film I've been in love with for now 28 years. So yeah, it's just a film that I never get tired of.
That's wonderful. I agree. Yeah. Everyone must see Amadeus if you can take anything from this episode. And it's almost another one of these situations where at times, sometimes with this show, I wish I could be talking about the Best Picture winner as opposed to the runner-up, because there's just so much juicy stuff to parse with Amadeus. But that is
they got it right. They got it right this year.
Yeah. But Amadeus, those talks are for other shows. This is the runner-up. A Passage to India is still a great film that is underappreciated. So,
and I really hope because that people, if you take nothing away from this, is that it's a film that does need, I think, is due for a revisiting. I think it's due for people to see this film, not just for if it exposes them more to the work of E.M. Forster, who I think is a genius, David Lean, one of the great filmmakers in cinema. I mean, when Martin Scorsese and Steven Spielberg both agree that David Lean is one of the great filmmakers of all time, and both of them have said it, then you do that. And then you get a chance to see an actress that a lot of people don't remember, like the great Peggy Ashcroft.
Yeah.
And you kind of get to see the birth of Judy Davis as a star who we don't see enough of. And so if you're fans of the Judy Garland story, if you're a fan of her Hedda Hopper and Feud, if you're a fan of anything she's done, this is an actress who can do everything and really is magnificent in this film.
There you go. A Star is Born right here.
Different film.
Yes. Well,
we'll be talking about that in 1954.
Oh yes, that'll be fun. So I want to thank you again, Tony. This was a blast.
My pleasure. Always fun.
Yes. Tell the people where they can find you on the internet if they want to hear more from you.
If you would like to bring it to me.
Yes.
Because I called you out.
You have invited it.
I have invited it. Please, at Gold Derby Tony on Twitter, and come at me.
Come at me, bro.
I don't know that I've ever said that phrase in my life, and I'm glad you said it for me, so I can still say I haven't said it.
Thank you. Okay, well, you can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson. The podcast is at Oscar Runner Up. The show is on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play. Rate, review, subscribe. And now I will leave it up to you listening at home to decide whether you think Amadeus deserved Best Picture or if A Passage of India should have taken it. And you can do that at my website at filmtrophies.com or email me at filmtrophies@gmail.com. So once again, thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Kevin.
And I will bid you all adieu.